Demonstration for was just I originally entitled the topic would be 200 years of dressage in 15 minutes or 20 minutes, you know, and I was just going to explain to you about, you know, some sort of simple biomechanics of how you know, what's going on in dressage today and where it came from and so on. And I had have this little silly little model here, but so essentially what you have really are two fulcrums that become really crucial in riding, and one is the fulcrum of the withers and one is the LS joint or the lumbosacral joint. And for 2,000 years, if you really want to go back all the way to Xenophon, dressage riding has always been about one thing, and that has been about loading the hindquarters. So if you go, we wouldn't have to go 2,000 years, but you certainly would go 500 years. You're going to go back 400 years. You're going to go back to the 1600s and see quotes from Duke of Newcastle saying the whole object of the school horse was to put the horse upon the haunches. And then let me tell you how. You'll see Garnier, you know, we'll talk about, you know, loading the hindquarters. The whole, you know, object of the Spanish riding school, when you saw 400 years of tradition, and what's the ultimate thing they do with the horses? Airs above the ground, where the horses then come completely light in the forehand and rock back on the haunches for the levade. So, and then something happened really in dressage and really in riding, not very long ago at all, maybe 100 years ago or even less than that. But if you go before that time, if you go before 1900s or, you know, even 1800s, a little bit later, I really defy you to try me a picture or an engraving or a painting or a piece of sculpture where you see a horse ridden with its head down. I mean, you can look in any country, in any culture, anywhere in history, and you cannot find even a single example of a horse being with his head ridden down. And then after this certain point in time, something happens where the horses, this now has become prevalent and a bit of a problem. But what we have in this little demonstration here was, up until that time, dressage was always about this. It was about loading the hindquarters, of using this fulcrum here, and we had our little friend, our jockey.
Yeah, your rider.
Yeah, we have a rider. So the rider then would feel a lift in the back as the horse would come down, the force would come down and under with the hind legs, and you would get a certain tension in the back and a lift in the forequarters. So if this sawhorse were nailed to this board, then when I would do this and I would rock this back, I would lift the front end up. So I would make the forehand lighter by virtue of, you know, transferring weight to the rear. Now, one of the things, this board is, in an odd way, this simple, silly little demonstration is actually quite useful, because if this board were just like soft rubber and you would try to leverage it and you would try to push down here and bring this around, of course you wouldn't be able. It would stretch out or it would fold in. So there has to be tension in the back. And if you go and you read, a friend of mine, Liz Toby, just did not long ago, a year or so, I lose track of time, but quite recently did a beautiful book, a translation of Grissone's book, you know, first time in 400 years. She did a beautiful job, but and a lot of people just dismiss Grissone for being, you know, kind of a butcher and being really harsh and a lot of, you know, really cruel tactics. But there's also some interesting things Grissone says, and one of the things he talks about a lot about the back of the horse, and how the back of the horse, you know, contrary to what a lot of people think, the back needs to be a bit rigid. It needs to be firm, and that's absolutely true when you're asking for this kind of collection. The back muscles need to be really solid. It's all hinges just plain biomechanics too, because as the horse's hind limb comes forward and impacts the ground and it sort of initiates the stance phase, you're going to have a ricochet kind of force. And the joints of the horse's hind legs, the stifle and so forth, will continue to fold. They'll actually fold more to absorb, and the epaxial muscles of the back and the glute, they'll kind of stiffen to prevent gravity from pushing the hindquarter up, and so that the mass keeps creeping forward till it comes to a point where it becomes vertical over that hind leg. And then the second phase of the stance phase, or propulsion phase, and then the tendons and ligaments unleash, and then this power gets generated forward and pushes through. And still, even at the point of the initial drive off the leg, the stifle may still be in a bit of like a folding in order to prevent this pushing up into the air. So that's kind of the mechanics of that hind leg coming under to generate propulsive force. And in dressage, we're using that to do this, to get a collection. And that's how it's always been. And the rider gets lifted. Now, you see today, then all of a sudden, the emphasis came on this end. And you saw riders now fixating with doing this, you know, and bringing the neck down and becoming this fulcrum here at the withers becoming really important to everybody. And they're just, it's totally fascinating now. And what an explanation of is oh, but look see how it gives you the lift in the back and it gives you the lift in the back. That's true, it does that. But look what it does to the hindquarters. Because if I have the sawhorse nailed to the back of the horse and I do this, what do I do to the rear end of the horse? I lighten it, right? It's a very simple fact, that's all. So it's, in a way, this work is the antithesis of collection. So why would anybody do it, or how could anybody sell that to dressage riders? It wouldn't make any sense at all. But I unfortunately, or fortunately, have written about it in one of my own books, that it is useful to do this sometimes, but only in the form of, let's say, you're thinking of like yoga or stretching, that you take a horse out of the stable or whatever, or your older horses, and when you put them down, you stretch out through the back, but you know full well you are not, this is not going to collect the horse, this is simply just going to stretch the horse out a little bit, and you're using that as a warm-up. So that's all it's ever been. And you've got people like Gerhard Heutzmann, who's a veterinarian from Germany, and he uses a lot of this long and low, and wrote a book called Tug of War. But also he says a lot of really very classic kind of things about, and there are, he's got little segments on the YouTube and so on, and about showing how classical, talking about classical riding, and very good statements, and very, but if you looked at it, if a stranger would look at this kind of riding, it's not that easy to tell that there's any difference between that and Rollkur. So, so what's this whole thing about Rollkur? Well, Rollkur came in about, and it was called long, deep, and round. But as far as I can see, that the first time that anybody that I know about the Rollkur, that you begin to see this, is really with Dr. Uwe Schultenbaumer and Nicole Uphoff, when she was riding a horse called Rembrandt. And as I said yesterday, the odd thing is that it's an American, Beth Baumer, who really brought this, exposed this, because, and I don't know how Beth ever got to do this, but she took these films at Aachen, and she filmed, Nicole Uphoff, who said that I don't ride like this all the time. I only ride like this because sometimes the horse wants to shy, and then I have to get a little submission and bring his head down. But in fact, she had the camera on for 45 minutes, and the horse never had a chance to bring its head up, and stayed down and was being twisted from side to side. And that was the initial beginnings of Rollkur. People like Chev Jensen and Enke von Grusen then were sort of watching this and finishing well behind Nicole Uphoff, but I'm sure decided that this was a successful system, and this is what you have to do to win. And then they took it to a new level and even invented a phrase called long, deep, and round, and where they put the horse on the forehand like this all the time, and then twisted it from side to side, and then that became a huge controversy all over the world, that was borderline on cruelty, that there was, there could be muscular spinal damage, all kinds of issues came from this kind of riding. The interesting thing to me is that you don't see it. You don't see it before. It's quite a recent phenomenon. All I wanted to do with this simple demonstration was, like, in a very short amount of time, in a matter of a few minutes, was just to have you remember these sawhorses in this board, because that's all you have to do. And remember that collection is about bringing the hindquarters down and under, and that gives you a lift in the front and makes the horse light. And that this will never, in any possible way, riding a horse down like this will ever work you toward, it is the antithesis of collection, and will not ever teach a horse how to engage the legs behind, nor will it build the muscles of the back and the glutes in order to come under, to support weight and pull the weight back. And that's really all I wanted to do with this little demonstration, was to show you that both of these things will give you this a little bit of a lift of the rider, but only one will foster collection, the other will just put the horse on the forehand. But that it is possible to use the business of putting the forehand on for a little bit of yoga or stretching, and it certainly wouldn't be detrimental. And I, in fact, use it myself, on some of my older horses or so on. It's not a way to train young horses, because it gives the horses the wrong impression, and instead of building up the back and the back end, you start putting them on the shoulders, and then it can get very hard to teach them at what point then will you start training the body, to take this new form. When you're learning any other thing, it's not like when you go to ballet school, you don't learn one kind of ballet in the beginning, and then as you get to be, a few years into the work, you say, okay, now we don't do that anymore. This is the way you have to dance from now on. You learn from the beginning the same kind of fundamentals that are using the same muscles that will foster collection, and that is, back muscles, glutes, and so forth, and this engagement of the hind legs. So that was my main gist of the point, was, and just to remember when people try, because there are a lot of complicated explanations about, this whole process, and how it can go wrong or whatever, and you can add a lot of layers onto it to make it so complicated that the average person can't even understand it. But in the end, it's a very simple physical matter of physics. That when you want collection, you have to work on this end of the horse, and that will give you the elevation and the withers, and that will make the horse lighter in the front. One thing I would want you to remember as well is that when you're talking about lightness in the front, you're not necessarily always just talking about lightness in the bridle. It's very easy to get the horse light in the bridle. All you have to do is put a very severe bit in the mouth, and the horse won't touch the bridle. It'll feel like air in your hand, you know. But that won't be doing this. You know, that won't be lifting the withers up. That might be just getting the horse to spit the bit out or come behind the bridle and not really foster collection. It will just be light in your hand. But the true dressage, the true classical principle of dressage have always been about lightening the forehand. So in a movement like the levade, there is no weight virtually on the forehand at all because it's carried back onto the hind legs. So that's really the little demonstration.